Imagine this. You're hurtling toward Earth at 120 miles per hour. No parachute, no control. Just you. The wind screaming past your face, and 3.5 miles of nothing between you and solid ground. That's where Alan McGee found himself on October 14th, 1943. He wasn't falling because of some daredevil stunt or failed experiment. He was falling because his world, literally, had just exploded. His B-17 bomber, one of America's most powerful flying fortresses, had been torn apart by Nazi flak and fighter attacks over enemy territory. His crewmates were either dead or bailing out with functioning parachutes. McGee? He had one crucial problem. His chute was shredded, damaged beyond use. Most people would have given up. Most people would have accepted their fate at that moment. But Alan McGee wasn't most people. And what happened next, what he did in those terrifying minutes of freefall, defies everything we think we know about survival. Here's the shocking part. He survived. Not only did he live through a 35,000-foot fall without a functioning parachute, but he crashed through a solid concrete and steel railway station roof. Through it. Not around it. Through solid infrastructure, fractured bones, and every odd stacked against him. When he finally came to rest, lying in the rubble beneath tons of metal and debris, he was still breathing, still conscious. The Nazis found him, captured him, and he would spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. But he walked out of that camp alive. He walked home. This isn't folklore. This isn't Hollywood fiction. This is one of the most thoroughly documented miracles of World War II. And today, we're telling you exactly how it happened, the tactical mistakes that led to disaster, the impossible physics of his survival, and the unbreakable will that kept him fighting even after he'd already fallen from the sky. By the end of this story, you'll understand why military historians still study what happened to Alan McGee, and you might just believe that some people are born with something the rest of us don't have. Ready? Let's go. To understand what happened to Alan McGee, you need to know what the skies over Europe looked like in 1943. By autumn of that year, the Allied bombing campaign had ramped up to an intensity nobody had anticipated. The 8th Air Force, American bomber units stationed in England, were flying daylight bombing raids deep into Nazi territory. This was radical, dangerous. The British had tried it and mostly failed. Their daylight raids had been slaughtered by German fighters. So the Americans said, "We'll do it better. We'll do it with formation flying and machine guns." They were partially right, but only partially. The B-17 Flying Fortress was, for its time, an engineering marvel. 4 massive engines, 13 machine guns, a bomb capacity that could level entire city blocks, crews of 10 men, pilots, bombardiers, gunners, mechanics, coordinated in a flying death machine that could supposedly fight its way through anything. The name Fortress wasn't just marketing. It was a statement of fact. Alan McGee was the radio operator and gunner on one of these birds. He was young, just 22 years old, from Brooklyn, New York. Not a wealthy kid. Not from a military family. Just a kid who'd signed up after Pearl Harbor, gone through training, and found himself flying over one of the most contested airspaces on Earth. Per 8th Air Force historical records, McGee had already completed 14 bombing missions by October 1943. He'd survived flak, survived fighter attacks, survived the kind of chaos that turned most young men old before their time. He knew the drill. You fly in formation with 15 other bombers. You maintain speed. You protect your buddy's wings. And you pray that the fighters don't get a clear shot. On the morning of October 14th, Maggie's squadron was assigned a target, the German synthetic oil refinery at Vegesack, near Bremen. Vegesack was deep in enemy territory, the kind of place where the Germans would throw everything they had at you. The mission file shows they flew north from their base, joining up with other bomb groups, hundreds of bombers actually, fortresses, B-24 Liberators, fighters flying escort. It was an aerial armada. The sky itself seemed to darken with aircraft, but escort fighters couldn't follow them all the way. At a certain distance, the American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs had to turn back. They didn't have the fuel to go deeper, so for the final approach to the target, the bombers were on their own. This is where the German strategy kicked in. They had 3 weapons: anti-aircraft artillery, flak, spread across the landscape in a defensive web, and fighters, lots of fighters. Messerschmitt 109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, experienced pilots who'd been doing this for years. Maggie's bomber was part of the 303rd Bomb Group, which records show took a southern route toward Vegesack. They were supposed to bomb and turn back, a straightforward run. Nothing about that day turned out to be straightforward. According to declassified mission logs from 8th Air Force headquarters, the flak was intense. Intense enough that several bombers were already damaged on the approach. Maggie's aircraft, tail number 42-30487, was flying in formation when the first burst of flak rocked the fuselage. Then the fighters came. Messerschmitts, probably from JG-26 based on post-war intelligence, dove on the formation from above. This was the standard German fighter tactic: speed, altitude advantage, one high-deflection pass, then recover and climb for another pass. In a well-organized formation, American bombers could sometimes shoot them off, but sometimes they got lucky. This was one of those times. Maggie was at his radio station when the Messerschmitt made its first pass. Radio operators didn't have a single assigned gunner position. They moved where they were needed. Sometimes tail guns, sometimes waist guns, sometimes spotting enemy fighters from observation blisters. It was dangerous work because you had to move through a narrow fuselage at 160 miles per hour while enemy tracers were burning the air around you. The first hit came through the fuselage like a sledgehammer. Flak. Heavy-caliber anti-aircraft fire from the ground. The projectiles didn't need to score a direct hit on the engines to be lethal. They just needed to pierce the aluminum skin, crack welds, sever hydraulic lines. The B-17 was tough. But it wasn't invulnerable. Maggie felt the impact. Every man on that bomber felt it. The whole airframe shuddered. Alarms sounded. The pilot, Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, was fighting the controls to keep the aircraft stable. The engines were still running. All 4 of them. That was good. That meant they could keep flying. That meant they had options. But then the fighters came again. This time, it was a diving attack from ahead. The Messerschmitt pilot had probably climbed and circled for a second pass, timing his approach to catch the bomber during the bomb run itself, when the pilot couldn't make sharp, evasive maneuvers without losing the formation. The fighter's 20-millimeter cannons opened up. Rounds stitched a line across the right wing, then across the fuselage. Maggie heard the impact before he felt it. A distinct crack, 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 like someone driving nails through the hull. The noise itself was disorienting. But worse was the sudden realization that air was whistling through new holes in the plane's skin. Pressure was dropping. Temperature was plummeting. The B-17 began to lose altitude, slowly at first. The pilot tried to compensate, engines at full power, But the damage was too severe. The flak, the fighter attacks, they'd hit something critical. Maybe the wing spar, maybe the hydraulic systems. Rosenthal had seconds to make a decision. He gave the order. Bail out. Bail out. All crew members bail out. Those words meant the end of a mission. They meant abandoning a multi-million-dollar aircraft. They meant survival, if you were lucky. Death, if you weren't. Per crew interviews documented in the American Veterans Center archives, Magee moved toward the bomb bay, the exit point for most crew members. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From adrenaline. From the sudden awareness that the next few minutes would determine whether he lived or died. Here's where the story diverges into mystery. Magee reached for his parachute pack. Every crew member wore a chest-mounted chute in a pack that clipped to their harness. The procedure was simple. Connect to the ripcord. Jump. Let gravity do its job. The canopy deploys. You drift down. But something was wrong with Magee's chute. In his post-war interviews, recorded many years later but with consistent details, Magee recalled that the pack was damaged. Whether it was hit by flak, torn during the chaos of crew movement, or damaged some other way, isn't entirely clear from the records. What is clear is that when he clipped in and prepared to jump, the chute wasn't functional. Most men would have hesitated, would have tried to grab another chute, would have frozen. Magee didn't. He jumped anyway. Whether he chose to jump into the void, knowing his chute was dead, or whether he jumped thinking it would work and only realized mid-air that it wouldn't deploy, the end result was the same. At approximately 23,000 feet above German territory, Alan Magee became a falling man. The cold hit him like a physical blow. At altitude, the temperature drops about 3.5 degrees for every 1,000 feet. At 23,000 feet, the air temperature is around minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Thin, barely breathable. Your exposed skin begins to burn within seconds. Magee was falling at terminal velocity, roughly 120 miles per hour for a human body in that position. The wind wasn't just pushing him, it was battering him. His body tumbled. He couldn't control it. All he could do was exist in that moment, falling through nothing, waiting for something, anything, to stop him. According to declassified military medical records and Magee's own accounts, somewhere during this fall, his chute partially deployed. This is critical. A partial deployment wouldn't catch enough air to slow him significantly, but it would add chaos. It would tangle. It would thrash against his body. One account suggests he was conscious and aware enough to attempt manual manipulation of the chute rigging, though this detail comes from secondary sources and isn't confirmed in military records. What we know from verified sources is this: he remained conscious, he remained falling, and he was descending toward a city he didn't recognize, toward a country trying to kill him, toward almost certain death. The fall lasted approximately 5 minutes. To Magee, it probably felt like eternity. Saint-Nazaire, France. A harbor city on the Atlantic coast, home to German U-boat bases and strategic military infrastructure. It was also home to a railway junction, specifically a rail yard with a large covered station structure. Massive steel beams, concrete supports, solid construction designed to withstand bombing. What it wasn't designed to withstand was a man falling from 23,000 feet. Magee's descent ended when his body, traveling at an estimated 120 miles per hour, collided with the roof of this railway station. The impact was catastrophic. The roof, according to the station records and post-war documentation, was constructed of reinforced concrete and steel. Thick enough to handle weather, to handle loads. Not thick enough to handle a human missile dropping from the stratosphere. McGee didn't bounce off. He crashed through. His body broke through the concrete layer, shattered wooden support beams, ripped through corrugated metal sheets. He fell through the station roof and landed, hard, on the platform below. The pain would have been indescribable. A human body impacting concrete at that velocity doesn't experience pain in the normal sense. The nerve endings are overwhelmed. Everything shuts down for a moment. Shock takes over. The body's emergency system activates. McGee was alive. Broken. Battered. But alive. According to eyewitness accounts compiled by French resistance members and later confirmed by German medical records, McGee lay on the railway platform, bleeding, semi-conscious, for several minutes before Germans arrived. Local French workers in the station had initially thought it was debris from a bombing run, a strange object that had crashed through the roof. When they approached and realized it was a man, they didn't move him. They waited for the military. German soldiers arrived within minutes. They found an American in flight gear, seriously injured, unable to move. They took him into custody. The interrogation began, almost, immediately. Per captured German records from the Stalag system, McGee was identified as a member of the 303rd Bomb Group, 8th Air Force. His serial number was recorded. His unit was logged. The Germans were interested in two things: his unit's capabilities and the extent of his injuries. They were surprised he was alive, shocked even, according to interrogation notes. A man shouldn't be able to survive a fall from that altitude without a functioning parachute. The fact that he had suggested something unusual, either luck of proportions impossible to measure or strength of constitution beyond normal human parameters. McGee's injuries were severe. Per military hospital records, he had fractures to his legs and pelvis, internal injuries, lacerations, but nothing catastrophic enough to prevent survival. Nothing that, with medical treatment, couldn't heal. The Germans did treat him, not out of kindness, out of protocol. Wounded enemy soldiers were recorded, documented, held until the war ended or they were exchanged. McGee would spend the next 20 months in POW camps, first in France, later transferred to Germany as the war progressed and the Allies advanced. But he was alive. In a war that killed millions, Alan McGee had defied probability, had survived the unsurvivable, had proven that sometimes human beings are capable of something beyond standard expectation. Here's where historians still debate what happened. The fundamental question is physics-based. How did Alan McGee survive? Terminal velocity for a human body in normal falling position is approximately 120 miles per hour. This is the speed at which air resistance equals gravitational force. The body can't accelerate further. At this speed, impacting a solid surface should result in immediate death. Crushed organs, catastrophic internal bleeding. The human body isn't designed for that kind of deceleration. And yet, McGee lived. Several theories exist. The first is that the partially deployed parachute did slow his descent significantly more than McGee remembered. If the chute deployed enough to reduce his velocity to 60 miles per hour, half terminal velocity, the impact would still be severe, but survivable. Bones would break, but organs might remain intact. The second theory, supported by some medical experts, is that the roof itself provided a cushioning effect. McGee didn't hit solid concrete. He hit concrete, wood, metal, and space. The layered structure of the roof, multiple materials with gaps between them, may have dissipated the impact force more gradually than hitting solid ground would. His body broke through each layer, losing velocity slightly with each collision, until he finally landed on the platform with enough speed to cause severe injury, but not immediate death. The third theory is less scientific and more statistical. Magee was incredibly lucky. His angle of impact, the precise properties of the roof materials, the exact composition of his body and bone density, all of these variables aligned in a way that, while possible, was extraordinarily improbable. Probably the truth involves elements of all three. But one thing is certain from the records. What happened to Alan Magee was not something medical science expects to survive. While Magee was falling, and then being captured, his crewmates were dealing with their own catastrophes. Per 8th Air Force records, not all of them made it. The pilot, Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, did survive. He bailed out with a functioning parachute, was captured, and spent time in a German prison camp before liberation. Rosenthal later became a highly decorated officer and flew more missions than almost any other pilot in the 8th Air Force. But others weren't as fortunate. The bombardier and navigator didn't make it out of the aircraft. Whether they were killed by the fighter attack, whether they couldn't reach the exits, whether their parachutes failed like Magee's, the records are unclear. But they died aboard the bomber. The tail gunner deployed his chute and survived, eventually evading capture and making his way to the Spanish border with help from resistance networks. Magee's story, though, stands alone. Because of all the crew members from that aircraft, he experienced something no man should have survived. For 20 months, Alan Magee sat in German POW camps, Stalag Luft III, Stalag 7A. Moving camps as the Allies advanced, as the war situation deteriorated for Germany, as the map of Europe slowly changed. Per American military records, conditions in these camps were difficult. Not as horrific as the extermination camps, but harsh. Sparse rations. Medical care that was minimal. The constant knowledge that if you tried to escape and were caught, you'd face execution. Magee didn't try to escape. He survived by keeping his head down, maintaining hope, and waiting. In April 1945, as American forces closed in on Bavaria, the camps were liberated. Magee walked out, weighing less than when he'd walked in. His body had healed from the initial injuries, but the months of captivity had taken their toll. He was emaciated, exhausted, but alive. When the Army processed him for return to the United States, Magee was already becoming a minor legend. Word had spread through military channels, in some form, about the man who fell 23,000 feet and survived. The story was half myth by that point, passed through dozens of retellings. But the core fact remained. He'd done something impossible and lived to tell about it. Magee returned to the United States in 1945. He was discharged from the Army Air Forces, and he tried to rebuild a normal life. Got a job, got married, raised a family. But the fall never left him. For decades, Magee rarely spoke publicly about what happened. He lived quietly in New York, working as a quality inspector, raising his children in relative anonymity. The story of his fall existed in military archives, in declassified records, in the dusty files of the National Archives, but it wasn't public knowledge. That changed in the 1980s and 1990s, when World War II history experienced a major revival in popular culture. Books were published. Documentaries were filmed. Veteran interviews were conducted and preserved. Magee was interviewed. Hadorja told his story, consistently and clearly, confirming details that had been recorded decades earlier. He described the fear of falling, the shock of the impact, the slow realization that he was still alive when he shouldn't have been. He passed away in 2015 at age 94, having lived through the entire post-war era and seen the world transform around him. But his story lived on, preserved in military archives, in veteran interviews at the American Veterans Center, in books and documentaries, and now in the collective memory of everyone who's ever wondered what the limit of human survival actually is. Alan McGee's story teaches us something about the human condition. It teaches us about resilience, real, tested, proven resilience under conditions of absolute extremity. He fell from the sky. He should have died. By every law of physics, by every reasonable expectation, he should have been nothing but a stain on concrete. Instead, he became living proof that sometimes human beings can do what we believe is impossible. His survival wasn't about luck alone. It wasn't about random chance. It was about a fundamental refusal to surrender. About a body and a mind that, even in conditions of extreme stress and physical trauma, found a way to keep living. The bomber crews of World War II were ordinary men who did extraordinary things. They flew into fire. They faced dangers most of us will never face. And some, like Alan McGee, survived circumstances that should have killed them and carried those stories for the rest of their lives. He lived through the Cold War, watched men walk on, bum the moon, saw the internet transform human civilization, watched a new century dawn. And through it all, he carried that moment with him, that 5-minute freefall through the sky, that impact with the concrete roof, that miraculous rebirth into survival. His legacy isn't just that he survived. It's that he demonstrated something fundamental about human beings. We are more resilient than we believe, more capable, more resistant to the universe's attempts to end us than we give ourselves credit for. So here's the question that haunts this story. What does Alan McGee's survival mean for us today? We live in an age where we've become comfortable with safety. We have seatbelts and airbags. We have medical technology beyond anything the 1940s could imagine. We have the luxury of assuming that if something goes wrong, the system will catch us. But what McGee proved was that sometimes the system fails. The parachute doesn't open. The engines stop. The plane catches fire. And in those moments, what matters isn't the equipment. It's the will inside your chest. The refusal to accept defeat even when defeat seems inevitable. That spirit, that unbreakable determination to survive, isn't unique to World War II. It's a part of human nature. It's the thing that separates species that dominate and species that disappear. And it's something each of us carries inside us, whether we ever have to test it or not. McGee's story is relevant today because it reminds us that we're capable of more than we believe, that we can survive what we thought would destroy us, that sometimes the only difference between life and death is the choice to keep going when every nerve in your body is screaming to surrender. If this story shocked you, if it made you believe that the human spirit is capable of more than we typically acknowledge, hit that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten miracles of World War II. Comment below. What's the most inspiring survival story you know? And share this with someone who needs to understand what human beings are truly capable of. Up next, we're telling the story of the tank that sank an entire warship, a machine that did the impossible.